Seth Leibson, Chris Buskirk. It's principles and politics. The Seth and Chris Show is on now.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. We've got Brandon Weichert joining us for the next, well, I don't know. We'll see how long Brandon can stay with us. He is a contributor to American Greatness. He is a frequent guest on this program and a friend of the program. Brandon, welcome to the Seth and Chris Show. How are you?
Well, thank you for having me on again. I'm glad to be called a friend of the show.
You are a friend of the show, and we'll chip in. We'll start a GoFundMe so you can get a tattoo across your back that says exactly that.
Okay.
But you have to promise to post the video.
Absolutely.
Brandon, question for you. So there is a very close family member of a well-placed, highly placed Washington politico who evidence has come to light that this person is deeply involved, financially involved with the Russians, with Russian financial interests, with Russian mining interests. This person is currently accepting big money payments from the largest bank in Russia. And it seems to me that maybe that's something that should be investigated.
Well, if that person is a Democrat, you're going to be out of luck. They're never going to get investigated.
That person is Tony Podesta, brother of John Podesta, who is about as high up in the Clinton world as you get without having the surname Clinton.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you see, it's the double standard. The Democrat. I forgot who said the other day. I heard a statement that if the Democrats they have to have double standards, otherwise they have no standards.
Right.
And so, that's the unfortunate reality. And
Brandon, it is the reality. It has been the reality. I'm not convinced it must be the reality.
No, I agree.
And what Seth and I talk about a lot is what we call conservative Stockholm Syndrome, which is that there are people who identify as conservatives but who secretly believe, or at least they act like they believe, that the left has a point, that actually the left, that leftist political philosophy, leftist goals, leftist ends, even maybe leftist means are worthwhile because they serve a higher moral purpose, that the left has the moral high ground. And I think that's false. I think it's patently false. And yet we have people, a lot of people, particularly within the conservative intelligentsia and also within Republican elected circles, who have acted like that for years and years. Our biggest challenge, I think, right now is not Democrats; it's Republicans, the type of Republicans I'm talking about, capitulating to them.
Oh, yeah, I just wrote an article at American Greatness about how the congressional Republicans are going wobbly when they're agreeing with these idiotic calls for a special prosecutor for this, the amorphous, poorly defined Trump-Russia connection there's no proof for, but the Democrats know that it's there. And these Republicans that are agreeing with it are these very same Republicans that you're describing right now. And in terms of the moral high ground, I have a good friend in Chicago. We used to always joke when I lived out there that the only thing Democrats beat the Republicans in was the race to the bottom of morality, how there's absolutely no standard that the Democrats have anymore as long as it furthers their interest, and their interest is about furthering the state.
Furthering their own political power, right? I don't, this is something they use government in service of their own personal ends. I used to think, I used to dignify with thinking that they wanted to achieve some other end for society. I think that this is much more craven than that at this juncture.
Oh, there's no doubt. Well, and all this talk about, how back in the Bush administration, Bush had to have known there were no WMDs because he was just such an evil guy. And I've always used to say, I wonder if they were projecting, if it had been a Democrat and we had gotten involved into Iraq, and it turned out there was no WMDs. Because remember, Clinton believed there were WMDs there as well. I always wondered if they would justify the political decision. I always wonder if Democrats are when they say all these awful things about Republicans, that they're actually craven worldview, because you're right, it's very craven the way and their pursuit of power is very naked and craven.
Brandon, the best way to understand the left is projection. I've said this for a long time. I say it almost daily on this show, which is if you want to know what the left is actually doing in real life, in real time, look at what they're accusing Republicans of doing.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yes.
Brandon, here's the question for you. You wrote about this today at American Greatness, but you talk about certain Republicans who seem inclined to go along with this idea of a special prosecutor. Who are they, and what are they saying?
John McCain and Lindsey Graham were the two biggest ones that came to mind. I caught a snippet, I think 2 days ago. There was many more. In fact, Politico actually had a link to the article in my article on American Greatness. Politico actually made a list of Republicans who were calling for this, but notably it was the McCain-Lindsey Graham wing. And part of me goes, what else is new? But as I noted in the article, I'm just getting tired of it. It's getting ridiculous now. The fact that they even have two Republicans that are willing to do this, when it's so blatantly obvious to anyone who's not, directly on Capitol Hill every day, it's very blatantly obvious that this is nothing more than a political stunt by the Democrats, because they're too lazy to admit that they just had a really bad candidate in 2016. And so rather than just admit that and try to build a coalition moving forward, which, to be fair to the Republicans, after we lost in 2008 and 2012, we actually did go about on the right trying to build a coalition of the Tea Party and the like to try to win elections, and it worked. But rather than doing that, the Democrats keep looking back, and they keep trying to come up with all these bizarre excuses about why they lost, and it's literally tearing the country apart, and it's disgusting. And if this were happening, if the Republicans were doing this, if the shoe were on the other foot, this would be the biggest scandal in history. But because it's the Democrats, they're going to keep pushing forward, and the fact that these Republicans, who've frankly been on the Hill too long, they can't accept that this is just a lie. They're going along with it, and they're waiting from having to pay the price.
Brandon, I agree with almost everything you said, but I do want to push back on one thing a little bit. Maybe this is a quibble, but I think it's an important one. Which is, you say after the losses in 2008 and 2012, Republicans went about doing the hard work of building a coalition based on the Tea Party that could win, and that did win. Particularly, you saw the Tea Party election in 2010. You saw it again in 2012. Then, of course, culminating in 2016. Here's my quibble. Tell me what you think about this. The quibble is this: the Republicans, that's sort of an amorphous term, and defining terms is everything. It wasn't elected Republicans. It was in spite of elected Republicans.
No, I agree.
It was in spite of what we call conservatism, the intellectuals.
Right, you're right. And I've actually written that in numerous articles. I actually wrote an article back in March on George W. Bush and the political Stockholm Syndrome on the right, and you're right about that. It was in spite of the Republicans. I was talking just generally in terms of grassroots, because I worked at the grassroots level.
Right, exactly right. This is my point: is that this is something that has come up and arisen naturally, and not just naturally in the sense of it's come up from the grassroots and has bubbled up, and we've elected good candidates, Tea Party type candidates to the House, to the Senate, and by the way, to state legislatures and governors' mansions all over the country.
Absolutely.
This has happened against the tide of the elected Republicans, of the official establishment, pushing back against us.
Well, and this actually cuts to the core of what I'm kind of alluding to in the last article I wrote, is that the Republican Party, when they say that we're a tentpole party, that's not just a slogan; it's real. In fact, I've often said that the Republican Party is actually far more diverse than the Democrats are, particularly in the way that we go about politics, because you have on the right, I remember when I worked on the Hill, there was a different caucus popping up every week almost, on the Hill. We're so subdivided within each other. It's not just conservative versus moderate. There are divisions within the conservative movement. It's insane. Whereas the Democrats, whatever problems they have, when push comes to shove, in elections and whatnot, the Democrats, like good totalitarians, they all march in lockstep. And so while I disbelieve that the Democrats represent anywhere near a majority of the will of the people, the fact is I think they're often, very, very often, better well-led and better well-organized, because their party is so not diverse. It's so singular and unitarian in its pursuit. So that kind of cuts to what we were talking about also in terms of the differences between.
Right, we have better ideas. They have better execution.
Yes.
Right, I mean they are very organized. There's a whole class of people who are all associated with the political left who are called community organizers,
yes.
right? And as much as we laugh at that term, they actually do undergo training, right?
I went to DePaul University in Chicago, and they have one of the leading programs for training community organizers, so I know.
That's right. I mean, this is Leninism that has been, and I don't say that as a pejorative. Well, I do. I say it also as a pejorative. But I mean, this is Leninism. This is a political strategy of street level politics that has been worked on and perfected and honed for a century. They're very good at it, and they do actually have institutions that train activists, so-called activists, what I might call rabble rousers. But that's another point. Brandon, stick with us. We're going to come back right after this break. I got a couple other things I want to ask you.
Sure thing.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Brandon Weichert is our guest. He is a contributor to American Greatness and also the head honcho. I think that's what it says on your business card at the Weichert Report. Brandon, do I have that more or less right?
Yeah, the big cheese.
Big cheese. Yes, that's written in the secret.
El Comandante.
Il Duce. I like that. Brandon, in a piece on American Greatness today. Sorry, it's titled "Congressional Republicans Go Wobbly with Calls for Special Prosecutor." We're talking about that a little bit in the last segment. You write this, and you're right. It's a newsflash: GOP won, and they should start acting like it. Tell me what would that look like?
Well, as I said,
in the unlikely event it were to happen that they started to actually act like they won.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's not good in politics to seem defensive, but I feel like there's so many lies out there. I personally would love to see the RNC hire a professional ombudsman to basically every time the media tweets or publishes a story, they're out there saying, well, that's not true, and we don't care because we know it's not true. So like the story about that apparently Trump gave classified information to the Russians when he met with Kislyak and the Russian ambassador and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. H.R. McMaster just came out in U.S. News and World Report's reporting it that it's total false. Total falsehood, not true.
Dina Powell's denouncing it. Rex Tillerson's denouncing it. I mean, the way the mainstream media and other Republicans ran with this within about a minute of the Washington Post break. It's the worst.
Came out and was bad.
Absolutely.
So anyway, though, my point is that would be nice. But I also say in the article, it would be nice if any time, now of course you have to follow committee rulings and they have those old style, parliamentarian rules, but you could still do this. Anytime Dianne Feinstein during the Senate Judiciary Committee tries to start talking about this stupid Trump-Russia story, it'd be nice if Senator Grassley was like, okay, thank you, sit down, we're not yielding you time. If the Republicans would bring Susan Rice before the committee for talking about...
Please, for the love of God, could they just do that? How is that not obvious?
It's crazy to me. Or how about any of the Obama... Or I would love it. You remember Gerald Ford, I believe he actually went to Congress as president against the advice of his advisors to go and talk to Congress in a committee hearing, and it ended up being a huge debacle for the presidency. It would be nice if the Republicans on Congress on Capitol Hill actually dragged Obama to come talk to them about, well, what the heck was going on? Why were you eavesdropping? That was totally wrong. Put the onus on the left for once. Why aren't Hillary Clinton and her lackeys being hauled into federal court by the FBI, being subpoenaed to say, well, what was going on with all of the Clinton Foundation? It's good that you shut it down, but clearly there's something going on. Why aren't we putting the pressure on them the way they've been putting the pressure on us? They are so weak right now politically. This is the weakest they've been since 1920.
Right,
and yet
finish them off.
The Republicans are the ones who are weak.
Yeah, no, right, that's exactly right. I mean, you want to talk about the temptation to snap defeat from the jaws of victory. Republicans like Paul Ryan and, as you were talking about, John McCain, they have it, and they are never fulfilled except when they are attacking their own party.
It's insane, and I think it has to do with the media that they listen to, because, I mean, remember in 2008, now I was a low-level person on the campaign, but I remember all the rumors coming up about how McCain was so worried about what MSNBC thought of him. What did they think of me? What did Andrea Mitchell think of me? What did these people on MSNBC think of him more than anything else?
Instead of worrying about what any elected politician in this country should be thinking about, which is what do voters think of them?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That is who they work for. That is who that is who anybody
and the
who
media
wants.
no longer people. They're no longer the quote unquote arbiters of information. They're no longer that. That's been busted apart in the late 90s. That was busted apart. Thank God. Then what Trump represents is he's a overcoming of that old school mentality. He is now the Twitter president. He is direct communications with the people. It's amazing to watch, and how so many people out here in D.C. they just don't get it. I've been saying this for months. They don't get it, and if you haven't gotten it by now, I guess you're never going to get it.
It's interesting, is it not, Brandon? I mean, Morning Joe is probably the pinnacle of this type of thinking at this point. I mean, this is where a lot of Beltway D.C., a lot of the political establishment goes for that news and commentary, and sort of a scandal sheet at this point for D.C. For D.C. though, outside of D.C., nobody watches it. Nobody cares.
I live out here in the Beltway, so I'm telling you, I don't know anybody who doesn't watch it. I'm an anomaly. People make fun of me because I don't watch it.
No, that's funny you say that. I mentioned that to somebody in DC's, and he said, "Well, you're watching Morning Joe. You've got to respond to this." I said, "Why? No, nobody watches it." He said, like, okay, just let's start. Let me just paint by numbers this for you. You're in Phoenix. He said, right. Nobody in Phoenix watches it. Nobody in Albuquerque watches it. Nobody in Dallas watches it. And so on and so on. He says, right. Everybody with a 202 area code or a 571 area code, everybody there is watching. And he said, and that, as a result of that, it has influence. It has a certain cachet because D.C. people watch Morning Joe.
Well, and also the cachet because, the whole, that creepy Micah, Joe, the will they, won't they romance, and then also the whole thing about Joe, used to be, I remember Joe was like a stalwart conservative, at least he appeared to be that way when he was on the Hill. He used to fill in for Rush Limbaugh, and then he goes on to MSNBC, and he becomes like this, self-loathing Republican, which is...
Still there, Brandon?
Yeah, are you there? Hello?
No, sorry, the line went, your line went cold. He said he's a self-loathing Republican who's just like...
That's who the MSNBC crowd likes. Is the only Republicans they like are Republicans who hate other Republicans.
Well, they've got one. I mean, they have found one. Every time I bring up Morning Joe, on this show or to people outside of D.C., I always get the same response from about half of them. Is like, why are you even talking about Morning Joe? Nobody watches it. He's got no ratings. Interesting point, Brandon. You talk about Trump being the Twitter president. Seth and I were having a discussion with somebody else. We were talking about we've got this book coming out. I'm
excited about it.
Yeah, it's called American Greatness: How Conservatism Inc. Missed the 2016 election. What the D.C. establishment needs to learn. Shameless plug here. It is available for pre-order on Amazon right now. Great. We're talking with our publisher about this and talking about doing some marketing. And here was an interesting. I mean, this was a bit of a. I guess this was the 2+2 moment for me in this conversation, which is that we're talking about booking media. We're talking about doing media with normal with normal people that would come to mind, Tucker or maybe Lou Dobbs or Hannity or different people in the Fox universe, right? And that you would want to do media with. But they also had some people rising. So, shall we say, alternative media stars? There are some conservative, pro-Trump media people out there, like Stefan Molyneux. He has a bigger following on YouTube and has more people watching his interviews on YouTube than watch CNN.
Wow.
Okay. Right. So, I mean, that to me was a revelation. I guess I knew what a big following he had on YouTube and what the number of views that his news videos and commentary videos would get on his YouTube channel. But then I was still sort of blown away when it was put to me that, there are more people watching that than if you were on most of the daytime CNN shows.
That's incredible.
I thought that was incredible, too. That tells you a lot about how the gravity has shifted in the media. And yet you still have, as you say, the John McCains of the world who are beholden to and are wondering, well, what does Joe Scarborough think? What does MSNBC think?
Yeah.
You want to stick with us one more segment, Brandon? Yeah. All right, sounds good. Brandon Weichert, everybody, we'll be right back with more. Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show, joined by Brandon Weichert. He has written an excellent piece at American Greatness today called Congressional Republicans Go Wobbly. Some call for a special prosecutor. In this piece, Brandon, you write, like a dirty bomb set to go off at a specific time, any special prosecutor investigation will slowly tear the administration apart. It will pit coworkers against coworkers, and that's about the best thing you could say of it, Brandon. This should be self-evident, but it doesn't seem to be to some of these GOP members of the House and of the Senate. Here's my question. It's hard to know what's behind some of these. Some of the motivations. Motivations are always tough to read, but is it purely naivete? Is it weakness, or are they driven primarily by a hostility to the president because he threatens their privileges and their interests?
D, all of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit of every. I mean, it differs for each different person, and it does also matter what district they're from. Is it more of a moderate district? Is it more of a cosmopolitan district? Is it more of a rural district? Because that's where the rural districts are where you're going to have the most stalwart support usually from for Trump. But it's a little bit of all of the above, and this is what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned that we're kind of a wide tentpole party. In the sense that, no two Republicans really are alike. And even my closest friends, I'd be described as a pretty stringent right-winger, but people that I'm very close with who are also right-wingers, some of them were avowedly never-Trumpers. And they didn't talk to me for a while because they couldn't understand how I was, and it's very interesting looking at the differences between Republicans and Democrats, because that's very telling, I think, to how we're going to handle power. The Democrats love power. That's their whole goal. And so they're going to act with, unanimity at the end of the day to do what they're going to do. I know there are Democrats out there who do not believe one bit this stuff about Trump and Russia, but they're going to keep pushing it because it's all they've got right now. And so,
Brandon, I don't think any of the senior Democrats believe it. The Clintons, Podesta, Susan Rice, Obama, they all know. These are not dumb people. They may be bad people. They may be foolish in a lot of ways, but they're not dumb. I think that they know very well that this is a created narrative that they probably didn't even think would last as long as it has, but it's working, and so they're going to run with it.
That's right. Well, I would say definitely the elected officials, but some of the more senior public, quote unquote, intellectuals on the left, I don't know sometimes if they do realize they take a little strain of knowledge about how Russia uses its influence, to use the soft power to try to basically curry favor through undue means in other countries, and they extrapolate that, these public intellectuals, and the kinds you see on Morning Joe, and most Americans don't see because they don't watch Morning Joe, but the kind of people that show up on Morning Joe, they use that little factotum and they try to extrapolate that to cast aspersions on the president and his supporters, and it's not true. It's just ridiculous. And I think you're right though about the elected people. I do think that the senior people do not really believe this, but they are running with it, and that's what I'm talking about. There's a unanimity and purpose. The right, there's never any unanimity. There's never. It's always backstabbing. And I said from the beginning, Trump's biggest threat is not going to come from the Democrats. It's going to come from his fellow Republicans, particularly on the Hill, because all their interests are parochial. And their interest also is trying to always score points on the quote-unquote mainstream media for the same reasons that we talked about earlier. They still think it's relevant.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not only that. I mean, you look at somebody like, and I take Paul Ryan, and I'll name him by name, but he only because he's emblematic of a certain type of Republican in Congress. He has been explicitly hostile to the Trump agenda. He's hostile to anything that smells of border enforcement. He's hostile to anything that smells of immigration enforcement. He's hostile to a pro-worker trade policy. All of the
That's
legs.
also because of his Ayn Rand philosophy.
You're right. I'm laughing, but tease that out a little bit for people who maybe don't get the reference.
Ayn Rand was, I don't want to say an extremist. She took the concept of greed is good to all new heights, and she wrote, the Who is John Galt narrative is her
Atlas Shrugged.
Atlas Shrugged. Yes, thank you. And basically, Paul Ryan was kind of like the club captain for Ayn Rand intellectual circles, and that informs a lot
Ayn Rand fanboy, I think is the term you're looking for.
Yes, and that informs a lot of his views, and I disagree with. I mean, I'm a capitalist, but I think that Ayn Rand was a little too far off the mark for me. But I know why Paul Ryan is the way he is.
Do you want to stick with me one more?
I'm available. Yeah,
all right, Brandon.
I'm just chilling out. I'm available.
I love it. Brandon Weichert, everybody. He'll stick with us for another segment. Seth and I will be right back as well.
Great.
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show, final segment with our friend and contributor Brandon Weichert. Brandon, wanted to spend a little bit of time with you, practicing what we preach. We say we shouldn't, as Republicans and conservatives, constantly be on the defensive. I agree. It's time to go on the offensive. And that means looking at what's been going on the left. What have the Democrats have been doing? We can talk about things like the surveillance of the Trump transition team that apparently took place. I mean, this is what Devin Nunes reported in that press conference a month or so ago. This has been confirmed by other sources that Susan Rice unmasked, meaning revealed the names of Trump administration officials who were being surveilled in these intelligence reports. We look at things like the Clinton Foundation, what was going on there. When we talk about all this, we talk about the Democrats who talk about Russian hacking. They want to get to the bottom of it, and yet when the FBI went over to the DNC and asked as a part of their investigation to look at their email servers, the DNC refused, wouldn't do it. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think that they refused because there was some things they didn't want the FBI to find out. Because once the FBI goes in, they're going to be trying to figure out what happened, and in the course of their investigation, they might see other things that may be questionable in terms of funding and in terms of what exactly the DNC is doing, and maybe find out some more evidence about what was going on with rigging the primary. I mean, who knows? But the fact is, if my house is burgled and I don't want the cops to go in there because I've got illicit narcotics or something in there, and I'm worried that in the conduct of their investigation they're going to discover that I'm some kind of massive drug kingpin or something. That usually implies that I'm not a good person. I'm not somebody that is an upstanding citizen. And I think the same holds true for the Democrats. I think that the reason that they didn't want to have the FBI poke around their servers is because it would show the extent of their corruption. And, of course, they wouldn't want that getting out. And, of course, they wouldn't want to have to go before trial and go to a potential jail sentence for that.
I mean, this is something that has been out there. This has been public for months and months and months, and yet nobody talks about it. Everybody on the right, and we even fall into that trap here a bit. And I want to try and self-correct here on this. We always say, the Democrats hurl these accusations. We as conservatives respond and say, no, it isn't so, and here's why.
Right.
How about this? How about Democrats? What do you have to hide? Yet you want to get to the bottom of Russian hacking, and yet you won't let the FBI come in and look at your own servers.
Yeah, and it's not just. I mean, obviously that the FBI looking into that, but the FBI was conducting an investigation of CGI, the Clinton Global Initiative, and I just that kind of vanished. That whole thing kind of evaporated, in the last 6 months of the Obama administration. And it wasn't because they didn't find anything. I think it was because the investigation was squelched.
Of course, it was squelched. I mean, and who was the director of the FBI at the time, right?
The sainted James Comey.
Is this something that you think? Maybe gets picked up again, or is there not political will? Do you think inside the White House to do that? I can tell you. I mean, look at the rallies that Donald Trump held last year. Lock her up was a frequent chant. There's plenty of appetite for among the Republican base.
Oh, I know, and I got to tell you, I was in shock when not only Trump publicly said he was not going to pursue criminal charges or any kind of investigation into Hillary Clinton or anyone connected with her. I was also in shock that Jeff Sessions said he would recuse himself should any investigation come up. This is part of that political Stockholm Syndrome. And I don't think Trump suffers from it per se, but I think Trump, especially in those first month or so, was really trying to reach out, and he made the mistake that Republicans of all stripes have made, which is that if I'm just nice enough to the Democrats, they'll go easy on me. But when you're talking about absolute power, literally the power to control nations, not just America, but through our alliance system, through the power of nuclear weapons and whatever, the military, you're talking about the power to influence the whole world. The Democrats have their eye squarely fixed on the prize, which is power. And sometimes even with Trump, it seems like we lose sight of that. And so if it were me, yes, I'm a partisan, but also, legally speaking, the Clinton Global Initiative in particular, even more so than the DNC, I would think, because of all the incestuous links between the Obama State Department, between the Obama foreign policy, especially when Clinton was there, and the Secretary of State, and the CGI, are so blatantly bizarre and questionable that the FBI should be doing a deep investigation. As much as there is an investigation into Trump based on these trumped-up charges of Russia collusion, there should be an even harder investigation, more thorough investigation of what the Clintons were up to for the last 8 years or however long CGI was around. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, Chelsea Clinton was being paid six figures for doing what? I don't know. With the weird things and the donor money. Saudi Arabia gave, I think, 70% of the funds to CGI over the course of its operation. Why? What did they think they were going to get out of it? It certainly wasn't because they wanted to empower women, with all due respect. It wasn't because they wanted to empower women or whatever, whatever.
Yeah, no, Brandon, they did. There were two women in particular they wanted to empower, Hillary and Chelsea.
Yes, but yes, you're right. But that was less because they believed in women's rights and more because they wanted to have an ear in the White House. And for all this talk about the Russian influence of the Oval Office now, what about the potential Saudi Arabian influence? Why did Saudi Arabia think it was so important to invest so heavily in one potential candidate of one specific party? These are questions that I would love to have answered by the FBI or some investigative body, but that where I have a feeling, unfortunately, even under Trump, even after everything's gone on, for whatever reason, they're not going to push forward with any of these investigations, and that's a tragedy.
It is a tragedy because these are absolutely critical. Because this is the type of political corruption that is exactly what the Democrats are trying to accuse Donald Trump of. This is what the projection that we've been talking about. You want to know what the left is doing. You want to know what Democrats are doing, what they're actually doing. Just look at what they are accusing the right of. I mean, this is a case study in psychology. This is what's on. This is what is on their mind. They're doing it, so naturally they believe that other people are doing it too.
Remember, they're also the party of Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall. So corruption is going back 150 years is kind of the name of the game for how the Democrats operate. And I came from Chicago. I lived in Chicago for 5 years. I went to college out there. I was involved with local politics there, and I can tell you it is blatant in Chicago, the corruption. Absolutely. And so this is how they operate, and they don't care. And no one seems to be able to stop them, and that's the real, as I said, tragedy, because it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse the longer it goes unchecked.
Brandon, are you familiar with the story that came out at the very end of last week that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh says on the record that Hillary Clinton pressured her?
Oh yeah.
That while she was Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton was pressuring the Prime Minister of Bangladesh to help the Clinton Foundation, to do things for the Clinton Foundation.
I did hear that. Yes.
Yeah. Are you prepared to speak to that if we keep you on?
Sure, I can speak to that. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Brandon Weichert, one more segment, and then we're going to call it a day. Thanks.
Okay.
In a little cafe just the other side
Welcome back to the Seth and Chris Show. Want to just programming note for everyone who is listening on Friday. We spent quite a bit of time talking about a billboard that is up here in Phoenix that depicts Donald Trump with some swastikas around him, or dollar signs made to look like swastikas, some mushroom clouds, a Russian flag, lapel pin. That Judicial Watch has documentation, they say, shows that it was paid for with public money, with tax money. The city of Phoenix denies that. We should have a representative of Judicial Watch on the show tomorrow. Just want to highlight that for everyone who was listening on Friday. This has been a big issue here in town. Brandon, I don't know if you saw that report on Judicial Watch or not, but it's a big thing here in Phoenix.
No, I didn't actually.
I'll look at my Twitter feed. I've got a bunch of stuff on there, including a picture of the billboard. But the thing I want to ask you about is there's a report that came out on Thursday or Friday. It says, I'm reading a bit of it here. It says, while Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made a personal call to pressure Bangladesh's prime minister to aid a donor to her husband's charitable foundation, that's the Clinton Foundation, despite federal ethics laws that require government officials to recuse themselves from matters that could impact their spouse's business. She did this while she was Secretary of State. The office of Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina confirmed that Mrs. Clinton called her office in March 2011 to demand that Dr. Muhammad Yunus, a 2006 Nobel Peace Prize winner, be restored to his role as chairman of the country's most famous microcredit bank, Grameen Bank. The bank's nonprofit, Grameen America, which Yunus chairs, gave someplace between $100,000 and $250,000 to the Clinton Global Initiative, and Grameen Research gave between $25,000 and $50,000 to the Clinton Global Initiative. So as much as $300,000 went to the Clintons on behalf of this guy. Then we've got Secretary of State Hillary Clinton making calls to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh on his behalf. Doesn't take a lot to put two and two together there, does it, Brandon?
And for Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh, I'm very well versed in Bangladeshi politics. Sheikh Hasina, her father was massacred by in the 1960s. He was the first PM of Bangladesh, 1970s. She's notoriously corrupt. For her to be calling Hillary Clinton out on corruption, it tells you how messed up the Clinton Global Initiative is. This is par for the course, though. This is par for the course. Remember, in the 90s, Bill Gertz reported that the Clintons were seeking illicit campaign donations from elements within China in exchange for secretly sending over or allowing China to access our nuclear secrets. Which,
I remember.
Of course, this is par for the course with the Clintons, and this par for the course with the Democrats.
Brandon, one of the promises that Donald Trump made on the campaign trail is that he would bring the Clintons to justice, that the investigation would proceed. I think that's a promise that Trump supporters of all people should want to hold him to.
I certainly do. I hope he does. I hope this new AG proves everybody wrong and proves that they're going to push forward with prosecution.
Brandon Weichert, everybody. Great guest as always, Brandon. Thanks so much for your time. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 o'clock. See you then.
Have a good night.